On January 22nd, we opened up a conversation about the Good Samaritan, which is a super popular, well-known teaching that we find in Luke chapter 10. And the question that was being asked by the religious leader, the expert in the law at the time, was, what does it look like to inherit eternal life? This is what the expert of the law was asking Jesus. And Jesus' response was really interesting. Normally when we hear this question, we immediately think, well, you got to believe in your heart and confess your mouth that Jesus is Lord and you will be saved, right? But that's actually not the answer to this question. Jesus doesn't answer the question this way. Jesus answers the question of what does it mean, or what do I have to do to inherit eternal life? He answers it. He says, you got to love the Lord your God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself, right? So there's actions there, things to do. And then the expert in the law, he continues, okay, well, then who is my neighbor? What does that actually look like? And then Jesus, he goes on to describe who the neighbor is. And so he uses a story about the Good Samaritan. And if you're familiar with the story, I'll give you a quick recap. The story goes that there's a man who was traveling down a path and he got beat up by robbers and left for dead on the side of the road. And so a priest walked by and kind of ignored him, walked on the other side. And then a Levite, which would have been a person from the priestly tribe in the first century, he walked by and he kind of ignored him. These both would have been Jewish people. And then the third person who walked by is a Samaritan who would have been an enemy of Israel at the time. And the Samaritan, the Good Samaritan, actually stopped to take care of this man who was beaten and left for dead on the side of the road. And so the question is, who is your neighbor? Well, the response is your neighbor is both the person who you stop for and take care of, and the person who stops for you and takes care of you. But in the context of the speed of love, we kind of looked at this and we wanted to see like what pace that was the Samaritan living at in order to actually stop and properly love the man on the side of the road. You see, when you think about it through the context of the priest and the Levite, they probably had somewhere they had to go. It probably would have been a massive inconvenience for them to stop and take care of this man. They probably had good business. They had temple worship to coordinate. They had a family to get to go and feed. And so they're living at this pace of life that didn't afford them the space to even notice and stop and care for this man. But the Samaritan, he was living at such a pace where he could stop, pay attention, and take proper care. We kind of said there's three elements of the story in regards to pace for the Samaritan. The first was compassion. We said that he was living slow enough, he was walking at a speed that was slow enough to not just know compassion, but feel compassion. A lot of times we see a video on YouTube, or we watch an advertisement here. I don't know if you remember the old World Vision commercials, and if you ever stopped to watch them, you couldn't help but feel compassion. But the easiest thing to do is just click on from it, or click skip ads, go right to the video. And what we're doing to ourselves is we're moving on too fast from the moment to ever actually feel the compassion that we're being invited to feel. We said that in order to feel compassion, you need to live slow enough to notice. The Samaritan had to live slow enough to notice the man on the side of the road, that he was in need. You got to live slow enough to listen. So not only did he notice, but he actually went over to attend to needs, to see what the challenge was and to hear what the need was. And then he lived slow enough to feel compassion. Compassion is a felt experience. It's not just a knowledge we have in our head. It's actually felt in our heart, in our bones, in our body. And so we had compassion. And the second thing that the Good Samaritan had was margin. He lived slow enough to have margin in his life to stop. He had space and time for interruption. One of the questions that is always so convicting when I'm asked it is, how do I respond to interruption in my day? And that will tell me the pace in which I'm living and whether or not it truly is the speed of love. And the third thing that we kind of said that week was that the Samaritan was living at the pace in which still afforded him resources. It talks about how the Samaritan, he had plenty to be able to take care of the man. He gave 2 weeks' wages for the innkeeper to take care of the man. In a modern context in Milton, that's like $2,500, $3,000 out of his pocket. And then said, if there's anything more at the end, I'll pay for it. And so he was living at a pace that still afforded him resources to properly care. So both the compassion, both the margin to stop and pay attention, but also a pace in which made him productive. He was productive productive. He was working on something. He had the resources to be able to properly help. And so the question was, maybe for you is do you wrestle with being interrupted? Are you living so fast that you actually don't even feel compassion for your own family, for your own kids and their needs? Are you present to what those things are? Are you paying attention to the things that people in your community are saying enough to feel what they're feeling and to notice what's going on deep down inside and feeling compassion for them? And then the other question might be, are you living at a pace that is making you productive? Sometimes people who are really compassionate and have a lot of margin in their life, well, they can't really help a whole lot because they're actually just not doing anything productive. It gives them all the time in the world and the space in the world. And the healthy balance and the speed of love is not that you are not moving at all, just waiting for someone to call you. It's that you're moving at such a pace that is useful and is productive and lends to your community and acquires the kind of resources that could be used to help, but in such a way that you have space for compassion and you have space for interruption.